Welcome to the Mormon News Roundup. I am your humble host, D-Base. That is Talent on Loan from Collab. It is February 2nd, 2025. We have a giant episode on hand, episode 149. Can't wait to bring it to you. But before we get started, I'd like to welcome onto my program my fabulous co-host, Megan. Megan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing really well. I'm really enjoying this episode. But for those of people out there who are not familiar with your fantastic YouTube channel and your entire personality, who are you and what are you all about? What's your 1 minute Mormon story?
Well, my name is Megan Connor. My YouTube channel is third_verse. You can also find me at that same tagline for Instagram, TikTok, and everything. My 1 minute Mormon story is that I, grew up in a super religious Mormon family and did all the Mormon things, except that I didn't get married in the temple. But I do have 6 children. I tried to Mormon pretty hard as I could in my adult years. I was a card-carrying, temple-attending member. And I wrote a book about my experiences in being trafficked as a child. And when I was writing my Mormon chapter, it turned out I was pretty apologetic for the church. And my partner, who's never been Mormon, insisted that I rewrite it. And in doing some research for that, I stumbled across some problems with the truth claims and totally deconstructed in about 3 days and resigned my membership. And notably, the people who come to my channel a lot of times come there because they know that I'm the cousin of Lori Vallow Daybell. And I talk about the similarities between our family system and the church system growing up and how the beliefs contributed to her life. And I'm the only family member that is sort of out of the church and speaking publicly about the harmful influence. And so that makes my take a little bit more unique.
Yes, and you do also have a TikTok channel that we're going to talk about here at the end of the show as well. Really glad to have you on board. I've seen you on a number of Mormon channels. You've been on everything from no nonsense spirituality to Latter Daily Digest. You really make the rounds, so you really know your stuff. So it is a pleasure to have you on board. Let's see what we've got on tap here for this week. We've got a lot of things happening out there. There's a little tongue-in-cheek reference out there. Unfortunately, this is in my neck of the woods with that terrible plane crash with a bizarre result, by the way. Alan, those of you out in the live chat, thanks so much for dropping by. Alan, great to see you. Kendall, awesome to have you on board. And Mormon Satan, thanks so much for being here once again. The midlife revolution, making small changes that change everything. Fantastic to have you. What are we going to be talking about this week here, Megan? What's on tap?
Man, it's been a very, very busy week in Mormon news. The Huntsman tithing settlement got kicked out. There was a snafu at the BYU basketball game for sort of celebrating a problematic person. All kinds of updates to the temple situation in Fairview, Texas, and American Primeval just came out. There's also some lawsuits that have made some progress over the week. There's just a lot to cover. I don't think we can get it all done in an hour.
We're going to give you our very best shot. First of all, how to watch The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Obviously, the first season of this was released several months ago, all in binge format on Hulu, but now it has been updated. And now, see, Hulu is a subscription service. You pay, what, $8 or $9 a month? I'm not really sure. Now it's available for free. A broadcast premiere this last week on ABC. Now everyone can know what The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives are. Have you been watching this particular show, and what are your thoughts on The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives and how it's going to be going mainstream that anyone can watch it? It's going to become even more popular.
Yeah, I initially did not watch it because I just did not want to get involved in all of that kind of girl drama that just, I don't know, it's a little bit weird for me, but lots of people asked if I would watch it and comment on it so they don't have to. So I do have some episode recaps on my channel where I do talk about The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. And mainly it's just a bunch of bullies who are suffering from the consequences of their own actions. And it is kind of fun as a brain dump kind of, guilty pleasure thing to watch. So I am going to continue to comment on those episodes. So if you don't want to watch the show, but you want to know about the drama that goes on and you want me to call out the harmful and bullying tactics of these women, my channel is a good place to come for that.
I like what you said, brain dump. I think that sums it up absolutely perfectly, for sure. Very popular show here. Transitioning though, this is also very, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, very controversial stuff, really stirs up a lot of controversy, but this really made the rounds this week. First of all, Conor McGregor, he's a boxer and a mixed martial artist, I believe. He's some kind of a fighter as well, I believe. Not an expert on the subject here. Look at what we've got here. Here he is at the BYU Marriott Center, built there in I believe, the early 1970s through generous donations from church donors. At a BYU basketball game, they are having a pretty good season here, but Conor McGregor, the problem here is that he's not just a controversial boxer who makes inflammatory statements. This just dropped as well. Woman who accused Conor McGregor of rape wins a civil assault case and is awarded a couple £200,000 in damages after a jury in Dublin's High Court found McGregor assaulted her in a Dublin hotel in 2018. Now, this is considered a civil matter and is not criminal, so he's apparently not going to be going to jail. But there he is at the BYU basketball game in the holy land of Mormonism. Why is Conor McGregor at a BYU basketball game? This makes absolutely no sense, Megan.
Well, I can't speak to why he's there for sure. I have no idea why he would want to go to a BYU basketball game other than maybe just being a fan. But the fact that, Mormons are accepting him, welcoming him, celebrating him in that venue, frankly, it's unfortunately not that surprising, just because Mormonism has a history of ignoring and covering up abuse. And so I don't know. This one didn't really shock me that much, unfortunately.
Yeah, see, he's set to appeal this civil rape verdict as a large crowd takes to the street in support of the woman involved. This just happened a short time ago, but the problem here is that when you look at him he's got courtside tickets here at BYU, and apparently, I don't know this for a certainty, but he was hooked up with these tickets. I don't know that for a certainty, but I mean, if he bought the tickets on his own, obviously you just can't keep everybody out of the BYU basketball stadium. I mean, that seems unreasonable. But it seems like they kind of rolled the red carpet out for him. And I think that sends a far more damaging message. In fact, look at this. When the church and its members say they don't tolerate abuse of any kind, that doesn't mean that they won't celebrate rapists. Because if you look at this clip here with Conor McGregor, he's leading the BYU fight song. Song here along with everybody. It seems like he's being celebrated. And we have somebody who's been convicted of sexual abuse. It's not technically rape here, but it's still sexual abuse. He seems like he's got the spotlight here. That doesn't seem appropriate, Megan.
Oh, it definitely doesn't. But again, it's not surprising coming from a crowd of people who support a church that covers up abuse of women and children and, in all these kinds of situations. So again, not surprising, unfortunately.
Yeah, nobody is stepping in to stop it. It seems like he's being invited to have a large platform. This is not who should be platformed. At my alma mater, I have 2 degrees from Brigham Young University. I taught there full-time or part-time for 24 years. This is not what I want to see on campus. This isn't who we should be celebrating. And where was the outrage on this? There was no outrage on this on social media. Everybody was championing this. And see, here's what happens a lot of times with the church, from my estimation of what I have seen. A lot of times the church will latch onto a celebrity that has some kind of a small affinity with Mormonism. Either they speak nicely of the church or they've got a relative who's a member, and then they'll latch on and say, look, here's a really popular person who likes Mormonism or likes some facet of Mormon doctrine. And then they trot that out and say, well, if this popular person likes Mormonism, you can too. The problem here is that who we picked here is an incredibly toxic messenger. This should have been stopped, but it never did.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we see him being celebrated. I don't hear any boos coming from the crowd. And, it sort of gets into this group think where it's like, oh, Conor McGregor, he's a recognizable name. I do think that the church takes advantage of these opportunities to latch on to somebody who's a celebrity or someone who has recognition to say, look how normal and mainstream we are. This person who has celebrity status likes the church. They're showing up to a BYU game to support, the Lord's basketball team. So they do take advantage of those opportunities to get some notoriety from maybe a crowd that they haven't, gotten noticed by before. I think it's kind of sad and sick, honestly.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. Not a good look here for BYU at all. And this is what Bonky over there at X, I follow her. She has a lot of snarky takes, which, as you can imagine, is definitely my cup of tea here. She says, when BYU rolls out the red carpet for a convicted, I will say, sexual abuser, because musket fire is reserved for 2 loving dads in a long-term marriage. See, Conor McGregor is honored, even though he's guilty of sexual abuse. But Matt Easton, he could never be put, who's the former valedictorian of BYU and an incredibly successful person with a PhD. He's not going to get these courtside tickets because he's gay. Who we're honoring here is really messed up. And look, I know some people could possibly say, okay, maybe Conor McGregor just bought the tickets on his own and he wasn't endorsed by the church. And here's what I'm saying to refute that. Look, this is BYU's official Twitter account here. It's at BYU Sports Nation. They say Connor Spencer postgame show, BYU TV app. He went on to the BYU postgame show afterwards. So it seems like they knew he was coming. They celebrated him. They let him lead the chant, and they're just honoring him every step of the way right after he has been adjudicated as a sexual abuser. This is beyond the pale. This is honestly, this is making me sick. I cannot repudiate this hard enough. I'm really disappointed here.
Yeah, it really is disappointing. And maybe the church is thinking, oh, that happened over across the pond, so our members aren't going to know about it. And, maybe they're thinking that they're just going to get away with it. It's incredibly obtuse in my view. And it's sad. It's just sad.
Yeah, and people will say, oh, that's BYU. That's not the church. Somebody at the BYU sports department didn't know their facts together. Well, guess what? The church continued to double down on this throughout the week in the Deseret News. And Colch over there tweeted this out as well. He said, though he wasn't, this is from the church's article here, what Conor McGregor said about attending a BYU basketball game. They're continuing to celebrate someone who should not be celebrated in multiple church avenues. He said, this is from the church article here. Though Conor McGregor wasn't officially recognized or introduced at the game, he still garnered plenty of attention, snapping countless selfies with fans and even wandering over to BYU's ROTC section to lead students in the cheer for the Cougars. That's where he was at the time. So it's not just BYU. It's the Church News, which is the propaganda arm for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then he's taking selfies with all the students. Everyone is just welcoming him, loving him, appreciating him. I didn't see one person in that stadium or in the church PR say, you know what? This is a bad idea. This is a bad person who should not be honored, who should be, I don't know. It's just so very disappointing. And look at this other thing that they tweeted out too. Interesting move, rolling out the red carpet for Conor McGregor. Woman wins civil rape case against Conor McGregor. And now the Mormon church just seems to, just seems to lap it up. This is another long line of troubling history of the church with sex abuse, whether it's Joseph Smith, and his predations on teenage girls, whether it's Brigham Young with his horrific 56 wives, whether it's Lorenzo Snow with Sarah Minnie Jensen, where he impregnated her when she was 16 and he was 57. People keep saying, oh, all that polygamy stuff, all of that sexual abuse stuff, that's all in the past. No, the modern church is doing the same thing, doubling down in popular culture. Why? Just because they think a few clicks, people will be interested in the church if they somehow affiliate themselves with Conor McGregor. What's your last thought on this one here, Megan? I'm pretty heated over this one.
Yeah, it just is another example to me of the leadership of the church being really tone deaf and maybe not even aware of what's going on with Conor McGregor and his case in the media, and really just trying to take advantage of a situation where someone with some notoriety is hanging out with the Mormons. And so to me, it just proves once again that the leadership of the church, even with all of their oversight in all of, these ex-Mormon podcasts and spaces where they sort of monitor things that are being said about the church, they still come across as tone deaf when they celebrate someone of this caliber who's just been convicted of a horrific act. And they just don't do their research. They are completely tone deaf, and they really just messed it up with this one, where I just think they're unaware. I think it's really, really sick.
Oh, okay. Two more tweets. I said I was done, but I'm not. Here we go. Here's one from Jake Welch here at BYU All Blue. I don't care how much money the bucked up bros paid this guy. We shouldn't parade this serial abuser and convicted rapist around like some kind of a beloved celebrity. I really think at BYU Sports Nation should reconsider giving this clown a spotlight. That's a perfect summary of many. And here's one very last one. I promise this is the last one. Why is BYU allowing a violent serial rapist to hang out with its students? I think technically speaking, it is considered a violent sexual abuser. I just want to make that clear, by the way, because Donald Trump did sue CNN over his he lost the sexual abuse case to E. Jean Carroll. He sued them because CNN said that it was rape, even though it was technically sexual abuse. But no matter how you slice it, Conor McGregor should never have been allowed to this position of prominence, should never have been featured in the BYU interviews. He shouldn't have been given a courtside ticket. He shouldn't. And if they found out that he had a courtside ticket that he bought, they should have rescinded that ticket the moment that his sexual abuse came to light. They shouldn't have featured him in the Deseret News. They shouldn't be parading people around who are convicted criminals, especially convicted criminals. Why can nobody in the PR department? Where is Aaron Sherinian? Okay, he's supposed to be running the PR department. He's AWOL. Right. Why can nobody run this past anybody with any common sense whatsoever and realize that this is an incredibly horrific look for the church and should have never been done to begin with? For those of you out in the live chat, I really appreciate it. I'm seeing some of your comments. Leave us a comment. For those of you out there on YouTube, we release these release episodes every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Leave us a comment about the church's treatment of Conor McGregor in this case. I find it to be beyond the pale. And I think we better just move along. You know, it's not just Conor McGregor that's leading the sports headlines here. I hate to have everything be about sports, but sports is a big deal. You know, it seems like the anti-LDS chants keep popping up at all of these sporting events. You keep hearing the chants that F the Mormons, F the Mormons. It seems to be more common. In fact, it's happening almost every time that BYU goes to an event. It seems like those chants really get going. You know, Megan, why is it that so many people do these chants when Cougars come to town? It's kind of perverse.
Well, I think a lot of the public at large is becoming more and more aware of the problematic elements of Mormon culture and Mormon teachings. And I think that seeing a lot of this Mormon true crime in the headlines and understanding a little bit more about the culture due to things like the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, I think people are becoming more aware of how problematic Mormonism really is. I think prior to the rise of the internet and the proliferation of all of this information online, people just thought of Mormons as kind of quirky, kind of weird, but generally really nice people. And now that more and more information is coming out, I think especially the younger generations are angry that people have looked at Mormons as being just such nice people, when really there's a lot going on under the surface that's really harmful and problematic to huge groups of people.
Yeah, well, I definitely decry anybody who's mocking Mormons and saying F the Mormons. I think that that is wrong. I just want to make sure that that is very, very clear. But if you are going to say it, you should say F the Latter-day Saints out of respect. I'm sorry. No, that's a bad joke. That's just a joke.
Please use the stylized name, even when you're mocking us.
I shouldn't have said that. That was wrong. Did you see what Elder Holland has been saying? He's doubling down on one of his famous tropes here about saying, please stay in the boat. He released a full video, which we're not going to watch here. President Holland, which is third in line in the church, by the way, in the succession, he says, we believe that we are God's in embryo. And Rebecca Biblioteca tweeted this out. I can't believe they're still using the stay in the boat metaphor. Hasn't this been memed enough? And this is a story from the Church News. Is there anything wrong with that stay in the boat metaphor? Because that seems to be one of Elder Holland and also Brad Wilcox's favorites. Anything wrong with that metaphor?
I absolutely hate that metaphor. And I'll tell you why. Because it is a metaphor that is trying to make Mormons afraid of leaving the church. And anytime that you are trying to control someone or manipulate someone into staying in your organization, that's a marker of a culty organization. And the stay in the boat metaphor basically teaches us or tells us that the leadership of the church wants us to think that the world is a vast and endless ocean full of monsters from the deep, of which we should be terrified, and that the only protection that we have is in the boat of Mormonism. And the terrible thing about it, the truth about it, is that it's not an ocean at all. In fact, this boat of Mormonism is still stranded on the same rock that it's been on since 1830. And if you climb out of the boat, you're going to find not a deep and endless ocean full of monsters, but a beautiful, incredible world that you can now experience with your own lens rather than only looking at it through Mormonism. It is incredibly controlling. It's manipulative. It's narcissistic. I really hate this metaphor a lot.
Yeah, I do too. I like what Brittany the Apostate said here. She said, I always use the doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith when I struggle with things in the church. It kept me hanging on the door for so much longer. I definitely agree with this. Of course, the irony with the stay in the boat metaphor here is that Jesus, of course, if you believe the gospel accounts here, he didn't stay in the boat at all. He bucked the system. The disciples are saying, "Where were you going?" He didn't stay in the boat. That's the entire thing here. If you're going to pattern your life after Jesus, which I understand a lot of people want to do that, he was not a person who stayed in the boat. He didn't keep sweet, pray, and obey. He criticized the authority. So it's awfully ironic. And I like this from Rebecca Biblioteca. She tweeted this out on Trexmo, which is one of my favorite memes out there. Some people just don't want to stay in the boat. And that's because, as some people in the live chat has pointed out, well, what happens when the boat has some holes in it? What happens when the boat is drowning? What happens when the boat is sinking? And what happens with the captain who is guiding your vessel? You come to find out that he's drunk or totally incompetent, or that he's not a captain at all. He's just a guy pretending to be a captain. That's the problem. Any last thoughts here on the boat metaphor? Because this always makes the rounds.
Yeah, if this was a Titanic metaphor, right? Mormonism has already struck the iceberg. The ship is already going down. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir is still singing on the deck of the boat, and the captain has already slipped out, just like the character in the Titanic who leaves the women and children behind. That's really, I think, what's happened over here.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I just want to say one thing. Mormon Satan, thanks for being the moderator. He's one of our moderators here on the Mormon News Roundup. I really appreciate that. And he brought this next article to my attention, which I found to be absolutely fascinating. This is new data here that was just released a short time ago from the Health of Congregation survey. And what are we seeing from what Mormon Satan tweeted out about people who are considering leaving their religion, Megan? What did he point to our attention here?
Well, it looks like Mormons are considering abandoning their religion more than any other religious group. So I like that he says, maybe it's time you consider it too. Consider abandoning Mormonism.
Well, and this goes back to our last slide here. We have President Holland and Elder Renlund and others who have used the stay in the boat metaphor. That's one of the favorite here. And the reason that they use that is because a lot of people are looking over the side of that boat and seeing that instead of there being swirling water, electric eels, and sharks, that there's actually nothing whatsoever to be afraid of leaving the boat. And I was astonished that Mormonism is leading the list of people who are considering leaving the church. When I grew up, this was virtually unthinkable. You're supposed to keep sweet, pray, and obey. You're supposed to doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith. You're supposed to stay in the boat. And don't you dare bail on the church, as Elder Holland would say. And now we're finding that Mormonism, in my opinion, the Mormon shrivel is confirmed, and there is a crisis of confidence. There are people who are deconstructing Mormonism left, right, and center. There's a couple of things that have been just released just recently. Word Radio, there was an episode that they did that they showed that 70% of millennials are leaving the church. And even in Mormon Leaks itself, from those leaked videos in church headquarters back in the 2010 timeframe, even then they said that 70% of people in North America were leaving the church before they were 18. And we're seeing a significant amount of doubts here. Is it because of the Gospel Topics essays? Is it because of the internet? What's the reason that so many people are doubting the church?
I do think that the internet has a lot to do with it, because now we have information readily available to us that previously we would have had to go to a library, or we would have had to go directly to the church archives to look up this information. And so the internet, I think, is a big part of it. But I also think social platforms like TikTok have given a lot of support to people who are having doubts, so that they're not just thinking that they're the only crazy ones. People are connecting with other people who are having the same doubts and the same experiences. When I had doubts about the church when the 2015 exclusion policy came out, a lot of us were afraid to talk to each other about our doubts. Our bishop called us into a meeting and basically said, I called this meeting because I want to know who has a problem with this. And if you have a problem with it, it was made clear that your calling was at stake, your temple recommend was at stake. So a lot of us were afraid to talk to each other. Now we have these other forums where we can go outside and talk to other people. We can go find people who are having a similar faith crisis. We can go find resources. And I think that's lending itself to lots of people finding support.
Yeah, regarding the policy of exclusion, Mark Nagel, who runs quitmormon.com, said that during that time frame in 2015, that was the most amount of people who were leaving the church at the same time. There was a number of protests that were associated with that. If you think about the Mormonish podcast, for instance, even Landon Brophy said that that was one of the catalysts of his faith deconstruction, is you have a revelation on one hand that was instituted supposedly where the Lord moved on the mind of Thomas Monson, and then just 3 years later, it was completely rescinded. That seems like an incongruous revelation. Now, just to cover a couple of people in the live chat, Mormon Satan, there's no bad reason to leave the Mormon church. I agree with you. And Jason Brown, welcome to the program, said the church is losing the young. I agree. Brady the Apostate, by the way, who has a great TikTok, YouTube channel out there, said, thank Mormon God for the internet. And Song said, for me, it was the racism, sexism, and homophobia. And Jason, it was the history and truth claims. Thank you all so much for being here, joining the program. We do appreciate that. Now, transitioning over to temples here, the Fairview Temple is still very, very hot out there. And, the church just in the last couple of days has indicated that they are going to be suing the city of Fairview in Texas. This has been a controversial temple that has taken quite a bit of litigation and consternation, caused an uproar. It has been covered by many news outlets, including over the pond in the UK. This is a controversial temple. And Nemo, the ex-Mormon, has released a short here where he talks about how Jesus Christ is suing a Texas town. That's wow. Is that true? Let's see what Nemo's got going on here.
In a move that has shocked absolutely no one, the Mormon Church has decided it intends to sue the small town of Fairview, Texas. The church and the town have been at odds for some time now over the church's desire to build a 172-foot tall temple in a residential neighborhood of 35-foot homes. Despite the church agreeing through mediation to resubmit a design at around 50 feet lower than their original, they've now decided that they don't trust the town will guarantee the approval of the new design. The church, through its lawyers, state that on December the 4th, 2025, the mayor of the town requested a smaller temple than the one proposed in mediation. So now they're just going to sue. Based in part, it seems, on a conversation from 12 months in the future. Their inability to use the correct date to one side, I can't help but think of the words of Kevin Hamilton.
Substitute the word Savior or Lord or Jesus Christ in place of the church. As in, I don't support the Savior's policy on you fill in the blank. Or I don't agree with the way Jesus Christ does this or that. For me, personally, that seems to put a very different perspective on things.
That means that this headline in the Dallas Morning News would make for some interesting reading. As always, let me know what you think of the unfolding situation in Fairview in the comments.
Okay, Megan, how do you feel about Jesus Christ suing a small Texas town to force through a multi-million-dollar esoteric castle where people will eventually do warmed-over rituals for people like Adolf Hitler, and let's not forget Holocaust victims?
Yeah, I think this is really terrible. And I liked what the people of Fairview said and the town council said when they said that they will remember the church as a bully. And I think that's exactly what we all need to take away from this. The church basically came into this tiny town in just to the north of Dallas and basically told them, this is what we're going to build here. And if you don't like it too bad, we're going to use our incredible storehouse of $250 billion and our team of attorneys to sue your tiny little town until you agree to our demands. And the town is not having any of it. This is a small place. The houses are not big, and they want to put this gaudy monstrosity in the middle of this little place where residents are going to be literally overshadowed by this gigantic temple and its huge steeple, which frankly I think is compensating for something. But I just think it's ridiculous. The Dallas temple itself, according to people that I know who attend the Dallas temple, is not well staffed. There's not a lot of availability. They're forcing people to go online and make appointments, which gives the illusion of scarcity. But in actuality, they don't have enough people to go to the actual Dallas temple, which, by the way, is only 23 miles away from the town of Fairview, Texas. It's a suburb of Dallas. So there's no way that the church actually needs a temple in this location anyway. But they've got to do something with their hoard of wealth. So they're buying up land, they're buying up property, they're building big buildings, and then not paying taxes on any of it. It's gross.
As Jason Brown said in the live chat, Jesus has the money to sue everyone. He certainly does. Jesus has more money than God and Satan put together. Now, this is what the church is saying about this particular situation here through the Deseret News. It says the church says Texas town is not standing by the settlement reached for the McKinney, Texas temple. The town of Fairview and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints negotiated a smaller temple in November, but the agreement may be unraveling and the church may seek legal remedy. So that seems to be what's happening here. Of course, there was the threats of lawsuits and others. The church wanted to put in an absolutely monstrous temple into the middle of a residential neighborhood in a very small town of very few Latter-day Saints. There was naturally a great deal of pushback. The town council said, we don't want it. It was outvoted 7-0. The church essentially threatened litigation, though not technically they themselves, but they eventually did have an intent to sue. That's when there was some mediation. They agreed on a smaller temple, but now the mayor is saying, you know what, maybe that still is a little bit too much, hoping for just a little bit smaller of a structure. The church is saying, no way. If you don't agree to what we have now, we are going to sue you into oblivion. And obviously, this is going to leave a bad taste in absolutely everybody's mouths for this situation. There's a lot of bad PR for the church, when if they had just moved it over just a couple miles east to the business section, nobody would have said boo about the whole situation. Any last thoughts here on the McKinney Temple and this entire debacle?
Well, I note very heavily that the church loves to put its temples in these quiet little suburban areas and doesn't want it out in the business sector where it could be straddled on either side by, for example, a 7-Eleven and a like nudie porn shop or something. So they just want what they want. And they frankly are the biggest bullies, and they're just going to push people around. That's one of the reasons why attorneys are largely responsible for writing the handbooks and the policies and even some of the lesson materials and correlating those things, because they just don't want to be held to account for any of that stuff. But I do really like the idea of replacing the name of the church with Jesus Christ. So I can say, I really don't like the way that Jesus Christ hid all of that money from the SEC. And I really don't like the way that Jesus Christ was so dishonest about its earnings with the IRS. I would have thought Jesus Christ would have been more transparent if Jesus Christ had a gigantic hedge fund.
I definitely see where you're coming from. Brittany the Apostate, everything about the temple is symbolic, which means the extravagancy is not necessary. That's an interesting point here. Jason, Jesus needs to learn how to read a zoning map. That's a good one as too. Hinckley Temple would be a great asset for Fairview. See, this is the difference when Hinckley brought in the 50 temples from, when President Hinckley took over in, the middle of the 1990s. From 1997 to 1999 is when he did his small temple push. And he took the church from only 50 temples to 100 temples in only a period of 3 years. Those small temples were only about 5,000, 6,000 square feet. Very, very small, very intrusive. Some of them, the steeple heights are even less than the stake centers. Very pragmatic. I mean, obviously temples are still a massive waste of time, but still not as intrusive. Hinckley had at least the right mindset about how to institute a temple building program, and he generally put them into places where there was a significant concentration or at least a critical mass of Latter-day Saints, not into places that were really close to other temples where those temples were not being used and where there were very few Mormons. Gordon Hinckley had at least a decent mindset about how to prosecute a vision for how to build temples. President Nelson doesn't seem to me to be doing it in a very respectful way, and it's caused a great deal of problems. And just one other aspect on this to round this out, Tad Welch from the Deseret News, again, one of my favorite page shills for the Mormon Church here, said that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints always obeys the law when it comes to these temples. Can you fact check Tad Welch here with the obeying of the law situation here with regards to temples, Megan?
Well, I can't speak about the temples specifically, but I do know that the church has broken the law on many, 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 many occasions. I mean, just see the SEC violation and then also see all of the abuses that they have covered up, and which is against the law, and so we could argue that as well. But I do agree with you. I think when Gordon Hinckley was in charge of the church, I think his temple building was an effort to bring temple ceremonies to populations that are, that had to travel a really long way to get to a temple. And I think he was really trying to make an effort to make the temple more accessible to more members. What I see Russell Nelson doing, though, is basically getting into a PUD measuring contest where he's saying, I want to build more temples than Hinckley, and I want them to be bigger, and I want them to be badder. And I just don't see any agenda any sense to his agenda like I did with Gordon Hinckley's.
Yeah, Kendall Christensen says the whole issue just makes me think that the church is saying rules for thee and not for me. Now, earlier in the week, the church released an update, as it does from time to time, about its temples. If you go to the churchofjesuschrist.org, I believe is the website, and search for the temples, it's newsroom.churchofjesuschrist.org. Look for temples. They give you a temple update every week. And this is what Rebecca Biblioteca pointed this out earlier in the week, which apparently has been updated, but still earlier in the week, she asked the following question. I wonder why the church's intent to sue Fairview, Texas over the proposed temple isn't included in the latest temple news from the church's newsroom, which is a very interesting question. At the beginning of the week, that wasn't in there, and yet that's literally the biggest temple news update. Why didn't the church want to talk about that, Megan, if they're proud of what they're doing in Texas?
It's interesting. They pick and choose the things that they want people to call attention to. And so it's really interesting when they choose to leave something out of an update because they know that they're going to get some problematic pushback on it. And I think that's all it is. It's just another hide the baloney sort of situation here.
Yeah, if you look at the way that it looked earlier in the week, that's on the right-hand side here. The latest temple news from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they announced an open house. They had a groundbreaking in the Philippines, and they didn't include the fact that they were going to sue the town of Fairview. That's why Rebecca Biblioteca fixed it and put it in there. Apparently, it has since been updated, but I do find it very remarkable that the church doesn't want to talk about its controversial temples. They just want to pretend that everything is on the up and up like they do. And this is what they eventually released out here is a letter to the Frisco, Texas stake, which I believe is the stake that's associated with McKinney, if I'm not mistaken here. And this is what Mary Elizabeth Cannon tweeted out here. She said, Mormon Jesus seems to be very litigious. What happened to all that obey the law of the land business? And this is what this basically says. As many of you know, the church has participated in a non-binding mediation in the town of Fairview. During this process, the church has made significant concessions, but they have delivered official notice to the town of Fairview this morning outlining the intent of litigation, instigating litigation, and this is apparently going to be going to court. It's just so much machinations that are associated with these temples. Why does the church, as we already said, there's a close by temple, it's not fully manned. Why is the church making these hills to die on when you could literally just make it a tiny bit smaller, move it over just a couple of miles, and it would all go away? Why is the church prosecuting these temples in the way that it does?
Well, I've said this a lot on my channel, and I'm going to continue to tout this narrative that I think the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints behaves in society as a narcissist. They want what they want. They're going to manipulate whoever they need to manipulate to get it done. They're going to be incredibly offended anytime someone dares to push back against their narrative. And then they're just going to basically railroad over everybody with their attorneys and their money. So I just think that, the church doesn't like to be told what to do. And when they have the opportunity to do what they're doing in Fairview, that's the direction that they're going to take. If you want to know what an organization cares about, look at its litigation history. Look at the things that Mormon Jesus is suing people for. That's where their priorities are.
And we're going to be talking more about that in the episode here coming up. One last meme on this from Trexmo once again here. Fine. You want to know what's wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong. The steeple on the temple we were married in wasn't high enough. Happy now? And this is the entire joke behind all of this, is that nobody ever cared about the steeple size of a temple until we got to Fairview. And even in the Brussels temple or other temples that have been announced since that temple, they have very small steeples. So it's like the church only cares about the steeple in this one place on earth. All the rest of the steeples don't matter except for this one. This is just such a bizarre temple. The Fairview thing just drives me crazy.
Yeah, and I think Nemo has done a really good job of documenting as well. David Bednar saying the temple, what the temple looks like doesn't matter. What matters is the ceremonies that are inside. So again, there's all this double speak. There's a lot of gaslighting that goes on. These are tactics of manipulative bullies. And I'm never surprised when the church comes out with all of this.
Now, we talked about the church's total temple strategy, and you talked about how the church should have done things a little bit more like Gordon Hinckley. But just this last week, if you look at what is released here in the Salt Lake Tribune, look how many temples have now been announced in my home state of Utah. I no longer live there anymore, but Utah's always got a near and dear place to my heart. And if you've ever been a Latter-day Saint, Utah is still a very important place. Obviously, the church's stronghold. Look, open house and dedication dates set for the 31st LDS temple in Utah and the third in Davis County. How many temples do we need in one county here of Latter-day Saints? There's 31 in Utah. And my understanding here, they've done some people in there have gone to the church's temple scheduling app, and they've written API scripts that have pulled out all of the scheduling data for all the temples across the church. And then they've analyzed it over a period of time. And the average endowment ceremony participation across the church is only at around 20%. And that's if the people actually attend those ceremonies. These buildings are spectacularly underutilized. They cost millions or even tens of millions of dollars, or in the case of the Salt Lake Temple, hundreds of millions of dollars. And you've packed 31 into the state of Utah. That seems like a profound waste, if you ask me, Megan.
It definitely does to me too. And if you believe the statistics on the Widow's Mite report, the church reports about 17.5 million members. The Widow's Mite puts that more at around 6 million members or so. And I agree with Brittany the Apostle here, where she says they aren't temples, they're billboards. Really, the church is advertising itself. And also, I would love to have the church actually be honest with the statistics about how many temples they've announced versus how many have actually been built, or how many are even in the planning stages. Because I think there are way more temples that have been announced that actually they're not even really acting on this. They're not building these temples yet. They just are announcing them to placate members and to say, hey, there's a temple coming towards you pretty soon, but they haven't engaged in actually building them. So I think there's just a lot of delusion going on in the Mormon church right now.
Yeah, I believe there's around 400 temples that have been announced or in some phase of announcement. And there's been about 205 that the ground has actually been broken on. And then there's about 50 that the church has announced, and almost nothing has taken place on there. There's a massive backlog that has happened with these temples. And but the church is going to continue to prosecute them. See, the church can't really control how many people join the church. They can't control how many people stay in the church, but they can control how many giant Masonic multi-million-dollar esoteric castles that they shove down the throats of these small towns. And that gives the illusion of growth, which is what the church is apparently going for these days. Now, I could be wrong about that. Those of you out in the live chat, would you leave me a comment about this temple situation? Let me know. Have we got this wrong? Or do you have better insights than us? I'm always looking for the further light knowledge that the Father promised to send, but never did. Now, let's move on. Utah legislature, look at this. Can you believe this? I can't believe this article. Look at this. There's a new bill here, Megan, that has just got me in stitches. Here, look at this. Rename the Mormon Cricket. Utah lawmaker says that it's time. A Utah lawmaker wants to change the common scientific name of the Mormon Cricket. Can you believe this? They're going to rename the Mormon Cricket? Come on, Megan. Tell me this isn't so.
No, I mean, these are really, really important issues that we're tackling here. I mean, if we are going to talk about a cricket and we're going to use a name that's a victory for Satan, I think that's worthy of the time of the legislature to spend on that. Let's not make church clergy people mandated reporters to save the children. Let's not end homelessness. Let's not give blankets and shelter to the unhoused in our own state. Let's make sure the cricket is being called by the correct name, because that is really what's important here.
Well, if calling a cricket by the wrong name is a major victory for Satan, the victories of Satan are just manifest here. And Rebecca Biblioteca has a nice take on this particular bill of renaming the Mormon Cricket. I mean, that's literally the scientific name of this insect.
It's Rebecca from Mormonish Podcast. There was something in the news today I thought would be interesting to share with everybody. There's a bill before the Utah legislature to change the name of the beloved Mormon Cricket. What is a Mormon Cricket? Well, back in pioneer day, the crops of the saints were being eaten by these malicious pests, the crickets. The saints prayed, and I'm sure they fasted for some kind of relief. Eventually, seagulls showed up. They ate all the crickets. They would throw them up and eat more. It's a very faith-promoting story. Turns out it wasn't true, but still faith promoting, and hence the name Mormon Cricket. This name is used in encyclopedias. It's used in journals of insects, if there is such a thing. And now the Utah legislature has a bill where they want to rename it. Why do they want to change the name Mormon? Well, victory for Satan and all that stuff, right? They want to make it more inclusive. They want to make it more respectful. They want to follow the LDS style guide. So lots of different ideas come to mind. Cricket of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Victory Cricket for victory for Satan. Throw out your ideas. What should the new name of the Mormon Cricket be?
I can't handle, first of all of those crickets on the screen. That kind of creeps me out, literally. Second of all, here, the war, the capricious war on the word Mormon, it's just got to stop here. I mean, this is heritage here. Mormon crickets. I know it's a legendary story, which, by the way, I have a video on the Mormon News Roundup, by the way, if you want to watch the legend of the Mormon cricket story, which is really probably a lot more legend than it is in factual reality. But this is part of our heritage. We can't just go on the capricious dictates of a pampered centenarian and rewrite all of Utah history. It's got to stop. And I'm not going to, if they change the name of the Mormon cricket, I'm going to still call it the Mormon cricket.
Yeah, actually, I think Satan's Victory Cricket has a nice ring to it. I kind of like that. But I'm just, yeah, it's incredibly sad that the state legislature is even considering wasting its time on something so ridiculous. Rusty's campaign against the word Mormon, again, is just an ego thing. He's just upset that he got called out in the middle of General Conference by the literal prophet of the time, and he's continuing to perpetuate this vendetta against it. So.
Which is why I like this meme here. See, Russell Nelson is definitely in favor of this. He always has his thumb on the scale of the Utah legislature, which, by the way, is 85% active Latter-day Saint. I do wonder if he is calling the shots, to be sure. And as far as renaming things and using the word Mormon, I do release a lot of shorts onto the Mormon News Roundup. And I just want to give one quick reaction here. Why I'm still saying the word Mormon, and inspired response to LDS prophet Russell L. Nelson, which brings me to the fact, by the way, that if you check out the Mormon News Roundup on Instagram or on TikTok, you'll get a lot more of these shorts. But let's see my reaction to President Nelson's capricious dictate about avoiding the use of the word Mormon.
To remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
The word Mormon is not a major victory for Satan.
Yeah, no shit.
For many years, Russell Nelson, the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has discouraged the use of the word Mormon, emphasizing that it detracts from the church's focus on Jesus Christ. While some might see his intent to emphasize the Savior as admirable, this capricious shift has alienated many members and outsiders who've used the term as a badge of identity or a simple shorthand for decades. While I generally believe that it is right to honor a person's preferred pronouns and what names they want to be referred to, Russell, I just can't get behind you on this one. Historically, when it comes to the beloved term Mormon, church leaders alternated between embracing and rejecting the term. As much as it pains me to say, I'm going to side with former Mormon prophets Gordon Hinckley and Thomas Monson and keep using it.
You can't stop me.
You can't stop me. Now, listen, when it comes to the comments section on my channel or other people's channel, I've heard some people, Megan, say that if you call Latter-day Saints Mormons, that's actually bigotry. And they always point out that fact that, hey, if you think it's appropriate to use people's personal pronouns, then why do you have a problem not using the word Mormon? Are these two things the same?
I think they are, to be honest with you. And I think it's ironic that the church leadership insists that we use their preferred name, but then tell us not to use the preferred pronouns. Like, that's a matter that's private. We're not going to get into that. And the other thing that I think of whenever this comes up is just basically that when I talk about Mormonism, I'm talking about the literally hundreds of offshoots from Joseph Smith's original church, all of the people who are in Mormonism that started with Joseph Smith. So not just the Brighamite sect, which happens to be the largest and arguably the most successful, the most popular, but there are thousands of people out there who are affected by Mormonism who we can just refer to as Mormons because we all started in the same place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're hitting you fast and furious here. Did you see this hospital in Serbia here, Megan? Look at this. Hospital center in Serbia named after Brigham Young following a generous donation from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They named a hospital after Brigham Young. Megan, should we be naming hospitals after Brigham Young?
I really don't think we should be naming anything after a short, bald, bigoted person who married 53 women, some of whom were teenagers, and someone who's so incredibly racist, who wanted to bring the state of Utah in as a slave state, who perpetuated the deaths of hundreds of indigenous people as well as other people. I just think he is a way more problematic figure than some of our Civil War, quote unquote, heroes. And there was a huge outcry about monuments to those people and things being named after those people. Right here in my hometown of San Antonio, there's a high school that was named Lee High School for the longest time. And it's been a high school in here for probably, I think, 40 years or something like that. They renamed it for the learning excellence something, that they made LEE an acronym instead of calling it Lee High School. And if we can do that with a high school in San Antonio, we definitely should not be naming anything after someone who has such a problematic history.
See, and I do wonder if the church donation included the provision that it would be named after Brigham Young, or if the Serbian hospital just did it on their own. I don't have any information about that, but you're right. Absolutely nothing and no one should be named after Brigham Young, including Brigham Young University, which is why I have a short here that I released quite a while ago about why BYU needs a new name. And quite frankly, so does this hospital. It's time to move beyond Brigham Young's racist, sexist, and anti-gay legacy.
It's time to rename Brigham Young University. Take it from me, I earned 2 degrees there and taught at BYU for decades. But Brigham Young's homophobic, racist, and sexist legacy have no place on any of the 3 BYU campuses today. We must acknowledge that continuing to honor Young at our institution perpetuates an outdated mindset that contradicts our values today. How can we possibly reconcile his hateful views with a 21st century enlightened humanist philosophy? One that values human flourishing and condemns a violent racist rhetoric. It's time for BYU to embrace a name that aligns with modern ideals and reflects true inclusivity. So what do you think? What would be a fitting new name for BYU? One that represents unity, progress, and respect for all people.
Okay, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, Megan. You're such a good sport and you can think fast on your feet. How could we rename either this hospital or Brigham Young University? Do you have any ideas of what we could rename some of these campuses or hospitals for?
You know, literally anything else would be better. How about we pick somebody who has, you know, engendered social change or who has been a champion for marginalized people? Or how about we just name it towards our aspirations? I've never had a problem with this saying that the glory of God is intelligence. Like, why can't we come up with some acronym that has to do with that, with the philosophy of the university, rather than naming it after somebody who we really don't want to emulate? And I'm sure if I had some time, I could come up with something snarky, which now I'm going to have to because you asked.
I put you on the spot. That's a tough one. Those in the live chat, though, did take a crack at it. Like Brittany, she said, I actually like it. We should name more things after criminals. How about Dahmer Funeral Home or Diddy Christian's Hospital? She does have a sixth sense of humor. Or Jason said we can change it to mean breed them young. Oh, breed them young. In I think I got what you're saying there. Okay, other church news here that hit this week. This was actually a massive week here. Mormon Church says no more speaking of sexual orientation. This is a handbook update here. The church has a general handbook of instruction, a 500-page manual of do's and don'ts, mostly crafted by bureaucratic lawyers, people like Curtin McConkie and others that have actually, in my opinion, become more important than the standard works. They release these handbook updates over the web now electronically, and you kind of have to monitor to figure out what's going on. Well, a couple of people noticed that there is a new update for the particular handbook here, and this is what it says. It says that people should, all age and behavior requirements of different church meetings and events should be respected. That requires refraining from overt romantic behavior, and it also precludes making political statements or speaking of sexual orientation or other personal characteristics. What do you think they're trying to say with this handbook update here right off the bat here, Megan? What's going on here?
Well, I think that they're saying that they don't want any open displays of same-sex, love happening in the chapels, and they really don't honor the experiences of LGBTQ people. I didn't really know about this until I read about it here on your channel, and I liked the response of Latter Gate Stories. I think that they have a perfect take on this, but this is just another one of those situations where there's going to be a double standard, basically.
Yeah, there is. So this is what Latter Gay Stories, which is a really, really good website out there. They're very fair, and they keep their pulse on this very, very well here. She said, they said a recent update says that you're not allowed to talk about sexual orientation or personal characteristics in meetings, and that's going to lead to some issues here. And they bring up a couple of examples. Are these rules for straight Mormons or just the gay ones? So for instance, if you are heterosexual and you introduce your wife or your spouse and say, "This is my wife Sarah," or "This is my husband," is that against the rules? Because that's technically sexual orientation, right? That's naming that yourself that you're heterosexual. That would be technically against the rules, right? Or if you had a crush on someone, I had a big crush on Johnny Lingo, or you had a wedding announcement, or discussing future plans. What this all says is you're not allowed to discuss homosexual orientation or personal characteristics. You can talk about the heterosexual stuff. You can say, "I'm going to go on a date with so and so," as long as it's heterosexual. This is yet another example of the church treating its gay members as second-class citizens. You can't even speak about a potential a personal characteristics now. This is a level of thought control that is very, very intrusive.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that it's incredibly wrong of the church to make a policy like this, because it's obvious who it's aimed at. It's not aimed at the stake president who's getting up and telling a story about his heterosexual wedding. They're not going to disallow that. And again, they get to decide what an overt display is. So people holding hands, is that going to be called out? Somebody putting their arm around their wife. If I happen to be dating a woman and brought them to church and I decided to hold hands with her in the chapel or put my arm around her, would that be called out? Because I know that there are men who are doing that with their female wives. And so it absolutely is targeted at a specific population. And I just think that it's wrong. There was no need to include this in the handbook whatsoever.
Yeah, Debbie Donovan, welcome to the show. She says a group that is sex obsessed, aka masturbation police, have zero ability to be taken seriously. And Jason said, "This is odd. Is there a need for this? Absolutely not. There is no need for this." And instead of just coming out in the handbook and just being honest about it and saying you're not allowed to talk about same-sex relationships or same-sex sexual orientation or same-sex personal characteristics, they just want to leave it general and then only enforce it on a certain segment of the population. This is how Mormon lawyers prosecute their version of church doctrine and the so-called gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, a couple of other big articles here. We want to try to keep this episode down to not too long here. Have you been watching American Primeval here? Have you been watching these episodes, Megan?
I have not. I have been too busy creating content on my channel, but clearly I need to take a look at it because lots of people are talking about it. And I kind of want to give my take. I want to know, how everything is portrayed. Is it fairly accurate or not? I have heard that it's relatively violent, but I think that's apropos given the subject matter.
Yeah, it is very, very violent. If you want to know my thoughts on it, I did release not only a short that is a review of American Primeval, but I also released a 7-minute review of it on the Mormon Movie Reviews, which we release new episodes every Monday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But since it is the number one, still in my, as far as I know, still the number one show out there on, I believe it is Netflix. It's a big, big show out there. They're already talking about having a spin-off here. American Primeval spin-off idea supported by the showrunner is better than season 2 happening because this is so big. Whenever the dollar signs roll in, I wouldn't be surprised to see a season 2. And this is what we get from this particular article. Netflix American Primeval has quickly become one of the streaming service's most popular shows, but a sequel might not be a great idea. The show centers on the Utah Territory during the time of the Utah War and follows conflicts that occurred between the U.S. military, Mormon militia, Native American groups, and independent travelers. While American Primeval is based on some true events, the series also makes use of fictional characters. Given its gripping subject matter and historical backing, it is unsurprising that American Primeval has risen to the top of Netflix charts. And see, there's a big beef here that's going down here between the Mormon Church and American Primeval. The church has released a number of statements in the last couple of weeks trying to refute refute the narrative that American Primeval is putting forward, that Mormons are bloodthirsty serial maniac murderers. Okay, even though the show doesn't necessarily portray that, but there is a lot of violence in the show. That's why there's a big feud here between the Mormon Church and the American Primeval here. So there's a huge feud. The Mormon Church called the show dangerously misleading. Now, I know you haven't watched the show here, but do you think that it's dangerously misleading to show a show that has historical fiction that regards Mormons in it? Is that dangerously misleading? What do you think?
No, and they came out with a similar statement about the secret lives of Mormon wives. Anytime that the Mormon Church gets portrayed in a negative light in the media, they're going to come out with a statement that says, this is not us, this is wrong, don't look here. They basically gaslight us into thinking that they are not who the media says they are. But I actually appreciate it when there's historical fiction, because sometimes the fictional characters are necessary to meld together several different storylines and make it digestible and not a 12-hour miniseries, right? And so I like it when people create historical fiction that calls attention to things that have been sort of buried or not as well known in the history, because it gets people interested in what the real history actually is. So I'm here for it. I actually love historical fiction, and I hope that it gets more people interested in the real history of Mormonism.
Yeah, let's cover a couple of comments. First of all, Mormon Satan, you gotta watch it. Yes. And or Kendall said Rocky Mountain Bible fan fiction sex cult. Or how about Brady the Apostate? The work and the glory, the truth would be awesome. And Debbie says there are so many massacres to cover. Mountain Meadows was a single event. And maybe my favorite here is Jason Brown. Jesus doesn't like Netflix. Remember, replace the name of the church with Jesus. He doesn't appear to be liking Netflix here. Big feud here. And as you mentioned here, Megan, this is from our friends over there at The Cultural Hall. That's not Culch, but that's a Richie Stedman's show here. The church slammed the show, but guess what happened? It caused more members of the church to be curious who previously were not. So the church was saying, don't look at this, don't watch this. And all of a sudden, this is a very faithful podcast, by the way, maybe one of our competitors out there. All of a sudden, the members are saying, well, if you don't want me to watch it, well, maybe I should be watching it. I do.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, and I think it's ironic, the Mormon Church doesn't want its members to be watching rated R movies. So yeah, Brittany and I are on the same wavelength over here. It's definitely violent. But what's really interesting to me is that the church is always against the rated R things that have any sex in it, but not any that have violence in it. So I've known lots of faithful members who are like, oh, well, I watched that one war movie, specifically like Saving Private Ryan as a favorite guilty pleasure of Mormons, because even though it's rated R, it's a really important story. So, we look on violence as not the same as, the sin next to murder.
Yeah, and as far as church history is confirmed, I can't help but bring out one of my favorite OG Redditors out there, Chino Blanco, who did appear on the Mormon News Roundup once upon a time. Was one of the very few podcasts who got him. You should really go back and check out that episode because he doesn't go on many podcasts. But this is what he said about American Primeval. Memo to the Mormons and the Mormon Church. Please spare us your rectitude about religious bigotry. In 2025, Brigham Young University students are still not able to express a change in religious beliefs without risk of eviction from their student homes, loss of their campus jobs, or expulsions from the university. And this is what he's tweeting in response to. This is the church's article. It says, while I'm encouraged by people wanting to delve into the actual history, I'm equally concerned about an increase in religious bigotry, including threats against members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that I've seen expressed on social media by some viewers of the series. That's why the church said that this was literally a dangerous show, is that people were threatening Latter-day Saints. Is American Primeval fundamentally dangerous?
I mean, bring the receipts. I want to see these threats, because I see the church pulling out this religious persecution card anytime they get the slightest amount of pushback on anything. And I think it's really gross. They play the victim all the time when they themselves are the offenders in the majority of cases. They've caused real harm to marginalized communities. They are the bully. And yet anytime they have anything that has been just a little bit of pushback on the church, and they tend to get all upset about it and cry persecution.
Yeah, I don't think it's religious bigotry that's associated with this. And I can't help, before we go into the next article, I can't help but bring up the fact that the church is known for having a history of thousands or even millions of lies of omission about church history. And now they want to be super critical about a historical fiction drama when they are literally the ones who lied to all of us about church history for years. The irony could not be thicker. Now, you brought this next article up to my attention here. What is going on here with Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand?
Yeah, so Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand are both currently serving jail time. They both pled guilty to aggravated child abuse, and they are both currently serving time for that right now. And what's interesting is that ex-clients of these two fictitious coaches are continuing to offer lawsuits because Jody Hildebrand, who, by the way, was instrumental in designing the addiction recovery model for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and for many years was an endorsed therapist by lots and lots of bishops. She made hundreds of thousands of dollars off of giving therapy to Mormons. But her MO was basically to separate a husband and wife who came in for couples counseling. She would convince the man that he had some kind of a sex addiction. And then usually this would ensue in a divorce and a custody battle between the couple. And she just has a really harmful set of beliefs that have led to horrific torture and abuse of children. So this lawsuit is being brought by a man in just the same circumstance where he and his wife went in there for couples therapy and ended up getting divorced and having a horrific custody battle over their daughter, who started to show up after spending time with her mother with lots of mysterious injuries, bruises, unexplained cuts, lacerations, and burns and things like that. So this person is a former client who's suing Jody Hildebrand, Ruby Franke, the Connections Classroom, and other associated persons over the fact that they've committed fraud in, touting these beliefs that are not therapy, but are actually very, very harmful. This man's lawsuit is asking for millions and millions of dollars in civil damages under the RICO Act, which covers racketeering in the United States. And that act says that a person can sue an organization civilly and receive triple damages financially, monetarily for that if they prevail in court. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out with both of these women in jail, and a lot of their assets probably just in questionable places right now. And he's asking for injunctive relief so that the assets don't get mysteriously sold or switched over to some other control. So it'll be interesting to see if he is able to prevail in this suit. He's not the only former client of Jody Hildebrand's to put forth a suit of this nature.
Now, I do have a question for you, and it was brought up by Songs, who one of our biggest fans here at the Mormon News Roundup. Shout out to Songs. She says, has the church renounced Jody now that she's been arrested, she's been put into jail? She was blessed off by some of the highest Mormon leaders, including Brad Wilcox and others. Has the church formally denounced her in any way?
Not that I know of. And this is really the interesting point, is that we've seen so many people be publicly excommunicated or denounced by the church, but not these criminals. People like Jody Hildebrand, Ruby Franke, my cousin Lori, Chad Daybell. Their excommunications are not talked about publicly, and the church does not publicize distancing themselves from these criminals. But then they can pick and choose that they want to be distanced from Tim Ballard, for example. And so they make that public. So they cherry pick who they want to promote and who they want to demote and who they want to excommunicate publicly. I would think it would be step one for the church to distance itself from anybody who is guilty of harming children. But I guess I don't know much about PR.
Well, that's the thing, is that we're going to distance ourselves from people like Matt Easton, and we're going to be sure to distance ourselves from American Primeval. But then people who reign with blood and horror on this earth, like even Lori Vallow, in my opinion, I don't even know if the church has distanced itself officially from her, or people like Jody Hildebrand, they are not repudiated in any meaningful way. And Songs brings this up too. She says, I'm pretty sure the church is still using her fraudulent addiction recovery program. And that's not, you can let me know if I'm wrong out there, but I believe the church is still using her fraudulent addiction recovery program. And maybe that's the reason that they haven't decided to repudiate her. I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think they are still using her addiction recovery program, but I think every time that they call attention to distancing themselves from somebody, it gives them more negative press, and they don't want that. So in Lori Vallow's case, we don't have any public announcement that she's been excommunicated. The only reason we know Chad Daybell has been excommunicated is because someone leaked the letter from his stake president. So again, you would think that they would want to distance themselves from these people, but they're just going to continue to pick and choose. And they just don't want to be in the public spotlight. They don't want to be associated with these things. It's really interesting what they do choose to talk about publicly. Like they'll issue, again, the American Primeval statement. They'll issue a statement about the secret lives of Mormon wives. But actual criminals who are actually harming and killing people, they're not going to distance themselves from that.
Exactly. Okay, a couple of other big time things happening out there. Of course, we have the President Trump's crackdown on what he terms illegal immigration here. And the church itself, there's been even some stories. My wife is a school teacher of potentially ICE agents coming into public schools and other things. And with President Trump's immigration crackdown, has some Latter-day Saints asking, what if ICE raids our Sunday services? That's a very interesting question, which is one reason that the church released a new update on its particular stance on immigration here. As deportations of so-called illegal immigrants continue under Donald Trump's administration, here is the stance of the church here. I believe I have that here. Here's the church's updated stance. It's pretty short. And in my opinion, the church's stance here, I would consider to be very moderate, or maybe even you could call it slightly progressive, where the church is typically known to be quite conservative. Their immigration stance is definitely more left-leaning, which is surprising for the Mormon church. Let's just cover this real quick. As a worldwide church dealing with many complex issues across the globe, the Mormon church promotes broad foundational applications that have worldwide application. We follow Jesus Christ by loving our neighbors. The Savior taught that the meaning of the neighbor includes all of God's children in all places and in all times. We recognize an ever-present need to strengthen families. Families are meant to be together. Forced separation of working parents from their children weakens families and damages societies. We acknowledge that every nation has the right to enforce its laws and secure its borders. All persons subject to a nation's laws are accountable for their acts in relation to them, and public officials should create and administer laws that reflect the best of our aspirations as a just, caring society. Such laws will properly balance love for neighbors, family cohesion, and the observance of just and enforceable laws. That's basically it from the church's website itself. What do you take away from the church reacting to Donald Trump's immigration, rather, I don't know if you want to call it very forceful immigration policy? The church has decided to release a statement clarifying its policy on immigration. What do you take from the timing here? And what is the church trying to say in its immigration particular statement?
Well, I find it so interesting that the church will say out of one side of its mouth that we don't get involved in political matters. And yet here they are commenting very publicly on a political matter. And the other thing that I find so problematic and harmful is that they talk about protecting families and not separating children from their parents. But where was that ideology in 2015 when they were telling children of gay couples that they had to renounce their parents' relationship in order to get baptized? It's just the kind of thing that infuriates me, because you can't tell what the church's actual stance is on anything. They are just going to come out and say what they think needs to be said, even if it disagrees with or discounts something that they previously stated. And it's actually mind-boggling to go through the mental gymnastics of trying to figure out what they really do believe. The only thing that is consistent messaging, in my opinion, that the church puts out is that what they care about more than anything else is the survival of the leadership and the tithing dollars. That's the only thing I can figure out that's a consistent message.
Well, one of the reasons that the church is so, shall we say, milquetoast on a lot of these political issues is they're very, very concerned about the fact that they don't want to lose their tax-exempt status. Now, the church is a nonprofit, so a nonprofit cannot officially endorse a politician, and it cannot officially endorse a political platform. So the church has really taken this to the nth degree by making it so that they don't really weigh in heavily on virtually anything. It's an abdication of moral responsibility on the world stage. If they are the true representatives if they are the divine arbiter of morality on this planet, and yet you, having been a Latter-day Saint or a Latter-day Saint adjacent your entire life, have a difficult time reading the tea leaves, that's just it's poor messaging. It's just another example of bad church PR. Now, I have two Latter-day Saint takes that I want you to review here, Megan, that go over the immigration policies that have been happening over the last couple of weeks. The first is by Dan McClellan, which is one of my favorite TikTokers out there. He's got 1 million followers on TikTok, and he is going to queue up a couple of things here that talk about immigration, kind of a Latter-day Saint perspective, including active Latter-day Saints at Word Radio. So let's play that for you. Oh, yeah, I've got that.
School, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way.
All right, let's see it.
You love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country, and then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world.
So this is a Christian concept in the sense that Christian nationalists commonly use it as a rhetorical smokescreen for their bigotry. However, it is both inaccurate and insincere. It's inaccurate because it purports to be Augustine's Ordo Amoris, order of love, or St. Thomas Aquinas's order of charity, but it is neither. It is actually what both describe as the natural order that is supposed to be subordinated to the order of love or the order of charity. See, for both men, you're supposed to love God and love your neighbor. And within the category of neighbor, they don't distinguish hierarchies. You love everyone. Now, both men also recognize that there is a natural intuitive impulse to prioritize proximity and to love those you are closest to and that you are around the most. And they recognize and they acknowledge that. But they also subordinate that natural order to the order of love or the order of charity, which requires that you love everyone. And both of them talk about how if you love those closest to you to the exclusion, to the harm, to the marginalization of those further away, then that natural order is disordered and it violates the order of love and the order of charity. Both of them say that you cannot do that. Augustine wants you to love all so that all can come to love God. And he recognizes that you cannot equally distribute your love to everyone on earth. But he suggests that you hierarchize things according to the accident of proximity. So if we go into On Christian Doctrine, we see at the bottom of this page, all other men are to be loved equally. But since you cannot be of assistance to everyone, those especially are to be cared for who are most closely bound to you by place, time, or opportunity, as if by chance. Thus, suppose you had an abundance of something which it would be well to give to someone else who lacked it, but you could not give it to two. If two came to you of whom neither took precedence either in need or in any special connection with you, you could do nothing more just than to decide by lot which one should be given that which you could not give to both. Thus, in the same way among men, not all of whom you can care for, you must consider as if selected by lot, each one as he is able to be more closely associated with you in time. So, in other words, you don't have these ideological categories that you put on people you don't know, and then you order your love based on those ideological categories. You love the people you come into contact with, whether undocumented immigrants or not. You do not love the native citizen in your town that you do not know more than the undocumented immigrant in your town that you do not know. That is disordered natural love, according to Augustine, and that results in sin and disharmony. Now, for Aquinas, the goal is not necessarily just so that love of God increases. Aquinas talks about the common good and social order, and again says that you should not disorder your natural affections. If love of someone close to you results in neglect for someone at a distance from you, then that love is disordered. So this is misrepresenting the Ordo Amoris, the order of charity. It is pretending to be that, but really what it's doing is inverting the natural order over and above the order of love and the order of charity in order to make it seem like they are authorized to neglect the person at a distance from them. But that brings up the other issue, that it is also insincere, because as J.D. Vance has demonstrated numerous times over in his political career, he is more than happy to neglect the people in his own community, because he, in accordance with right-wing authoritarian and social dominance orientation identity politics, opposes programs that support the poor and the vulnerable and the needy, whether that's because of socioeconomics, whether that's because of race, whether that's because of ideology, sexual identity, all those things. There are plenty of times where J.D. Vance has advocated for neglecting the people that are close to him because they don't support his ideologies, which is a flagrant violation of both the Ordo Amoris as well as the Order of Charity. Vance is not suggesting we can't take care of others until we take care of our own, because Vance is not interested in taking care of our own. If he were, then we would have a much more robust social safety net. We would not be marginalizing and minoritizing and oppressing groups based on sexual orientation or sexual identity or things like that. We would actually be taking care of our own. But right-wing authoritarianism is not particularly adept at doing that. What they are adept at is rhetorical prophylaxis for their bigotry, which is exactly what Vance is doing here.
But there's this old...
Okay. You're a lot smarter than I am, Megan. What is Dan McClellan trying to say here? And more importantly, is he right? Whoops. You're muted there. Yeah.
I tend to defer to Dan McClellan because he's way smarter than I am. He definitely is a really intelligent scholar of Bible and religion. I've been a big fan of his for quite a while. So I tend to really believe what he talks about because he brings the receipts. I think what he's basically trying to say is that we're not allowed to put a qualifier. If we're really following what the Bible teaches, that we're not allowed to put a qualifier on whom we love. And we're not allowed to put love of one neighbor above love of another neighbor. And so I think what he's basically saying is that we don't get to pick and choose which neighbors we're going to love and to what extent. And it reminds me of the 2019 talk by Dallin Oaks during the women's session of conference, where he talks about this very thing. He says that we can't let following the second commandment of loving our neighbor as ourselves to interfere with the first commandment of loving God. So basically what Dallin Oaks was saying is that if we love our neighbor, but that conflicts with our love of God, then we probably are doing the wrong thing in loving our neighbor, basically trying to convince us that it's okay to not love certain neighbors as much as others. And Dan McClellan is saying that's absolutely against the biblical teaching here.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about this crackdown, and I do wonder how it is all going to work out. I do, in some ways, appreciate the church's sentiment here, which advocates for, shall we say, a Christian empathy towards especially marginalized people. So I'm very conflicted, and I do appreciate Dan's particular take on here. What's amusing, I think, for a lot of especially evangelicals and right-wing MAGA types out there is that they talk about, I saw this on X as well here, where somebody tweeted out, breaking news, Jesus wasn't a refugee. In other words, we should only have people in our country that are quote unquote belong here. But Dan always rebukes people in the best way. He says, well, if you understand Matthew's nativity account to be historical, Jesus is a refugee according to every salient sense of the word. To say he wasn't a refugee, you must reject Matthew, not know what you're talking about, be lying, or some combination of these options, because technically, according to Matthew's narrative, remember, he fled to Egypt, right? He was technically a refugee, whereas in Luke, he doesn't, as I recall. Anyway, if you're going to follow Jesus, in my opinion, then you shouldn't prosecute these very harmful doctrines or these policies in the way that they have. Now, we're wrapping things up here. We actually saved the biggest news article here for last, which is we're going to go out on this one. Look at this, a thunderbolt across the Blaggernacle here, Megan. Unanimous Ninth Circuit panel dismisses James Huntsman's tithing lawsuit. Judges grant summary judgment to Latter-day Saints, saying no reasonable juror could conclude that the church misrepresented the source of funds for the Cedar Creek project. It looks like James Huntsman, after all of his years of fighting the church, trying to get his tithing back, it looks like might have reached the end of the road here. He's not getting his tithing back according to this particular ruling here. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, it's been a kind of confusing thing to watch. I've tried to read as much as I could about this suit because I want to understand the legal arguments that are underpinning this here. And I think that ultimately what the court concluded is that you can't reasonably assert that the church leadership was misleading about where the tithing funds, or where the money was coming from to fund their purchase of City Creek Mall and bailing out beneficial life insurance, etc. I think that the salient argument came down to basically you donate your tithing dollars, and then if the church decides that they want to invest that, then they're not technically being misleading, because technically the money came from the investment fund, not from the actual tithing coffers. I think there's a little bit of gray area. I still think that there's room in here somewhere for a tithing settlement or a tithing lawsuit to be won by someone by claiming things other than dearly held religious beliefs. I still think that there's a way for someone, some smart, really brilliant legal mind, to find a way to get a class action suit through. I still think that there's hope for that. And I really hope that other attorneys and other potential plaintiffs will look at that and see if there's a possibility for that to happen.
Well, you, Megan, are holding out a little bit more hope than I am. This was a 11-0 slam dunk. Sometimes you at least get a dissenting opinion here, which says, well, here's your avenue of what could be a way forward. They absolutely destroyed James Huntsman. They said that no reasonable juror could conclude that the church had misrepresented in specifically the use of where the funds came for the $1.4 billion for the City Creek Mall development. Because even though President Hinckley said that not one penny of tithing would be used for City Creek, in a previous statement that he said in a rather obscure setting about a decade earlier, he said that invested reserves and tithing are essentially synonymous, which is essentially gave the church the loophole that they needed to say that they were not committing fraud here. There's been a number of copycat lawsuits that have spawned since James Huntsman, since when James Huntsman, his initial lawsuit, he lost, but then on appeal in the three-judge panel, he won a portion of his lawsuit, specifically the City Creek Mall lawsuit, even though the beneficial life part was thrown out. That's when the copycat lawsuits came forward and have been consolidated in Salt Lake City under Judge Shelby. I see this as a very dim view forward for those copycat lawsuits, since they are based on not only James Huntsman, but also David Nielsen's particular whistleblowing as well. I see an extremely dim view forward. James Huntsman had some of the best lawyers in the country working on this. He spent potentially even millions of his own dollars. There's not any other tithing litigants out there, you, me, or anybody else, who's going to be able to spend that kind of resources. And he brought it in California. This is one of the most liberal, anti-church, godless atheist places that it could be brought forward for a specific reason. And it died summarily 11-0. I see this as absolutely devastating to anyone who's trying to get their tithing back.
Well, now I'm just depressed, because I think you're probably right about that, looking at it from that point of view. I think there's some avenues that maybe haven't yet been legally explored. And I do think that, you're right. The copycat suits are largely arguing some of the same points. But I think that there are some things to be explored. Now, I'm not an attorney, and I don't even play one on TV, but I'm definitely going to be doing some AI research on this to find out if there's a loophole or a way through somewhere.
Right. This is what the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News splashed this on the front page. James Huntsman sent packing. And I have people in my comments section here who go back to my old James Huntsman tithing videos and say, see, you were wrong about James Huntsman. This was being followed very carefully by active Latter-day Saints. This is a big deal. This could have opened up the church to a massive amount of legal, what do they call it? A massive amount of legal liability. But no, this is what the Ninth Circuit said. One of the most liberal circuits in the country here. No reasonable juror would believe allegations that the faith misrepresented how it spent money on the City Creek Center. And said, and this was, in my opinion, one of the chinks in the church's armor, because it seemed like President Hinckley was talking out of his mouth at the same time. If you can't find, this is kind of like the Lord of the Rings, where they shoot the dragon and he's got the little hole in the armor. If you can't hit the armor here, the heart of the church, with this particular misstatements, which President Hinckley was incredibly sloppy, and others about how they said that they were going to build the City Creek Mall, I don't understand how you're going to be able to have a way to go forward. Now, obviously, I'm not a lawyer either, but see, in James Huntsman, in his initial argument, he said that he also, part of his statement was, I was giving money to the church and I thought that they were doing good with it, but it turns out that most of it went to an investment fund. That's what he initially, that's part of his lawsuit that also lost. Every aspect of this lawsuit is dead. And I don't see how it's going to go forward. I'm really doom and gloom about this. So
yeah, I agree with you about this particular lawsuit. And I don't know. I didn't consider the possibility that you're right. James Huntsman has access to the finest legal minds, and he's got access to millions of dollars to spend on a lawsuit.
Yep.
So, who else is there as an ex-member or a member that's disillusioned, disaffected with the church that has those kind of resources? I don't know.
I'm just going to jump in a little bit more because I do follow the church finances as carefully as I possibly can. Other lawyers now that have looked at this have been following this. The sharks, these lawyers are circling. They know how much money the church has, $300 billion, according to the Widows' Might report, just released a couple of years ago. Those lawyers are smelling that and sniffing that. Now they see what has happened after years. These law firms spending millions of dollars on these lawsuits, and they come away absolutely empty-handed. Do you really think that there's a bunch of lawyers that are going to sign up to try to do the exact same thing? And if it's not this lawsuit, then what kind of a lawsuit are you going to file? It seems like the Gaddy lawsuit also has a dim path forward. Look, getting tithing back from the church is almost completely and utterly impossible. Although if you go look on my particular channel, there has been one person that has gotten his tithing back from the church, which I'm going to leave that for you for a teaser. His name's Val Southwick, and the people who are associated with him, they managed to get their tithing back from the church. I'll leave that for a teaser out there. But yeah, it seems like this is a bad news situation. Let me just read this for you real quick here, and I'll give you the last word on this Huntsman lawsuit. This is the judge here, was among the Ninth Circuit members who grilled James Huntsman lawyers in oral arguments in September. He agreed with Friday's decision. They all did. But he too found problems with Huntsman's case on religious grounds because Huntsman's claims involve court interference in matters of religious truth. The church autonomy doctrine bars reaching the merits of his claims. Okay, so that's it. This is basically saying that the lawyers of James Huntsman said this was a fraud case. The church's lawyers said this is a religious liberty case and a First Amendment cases, and all of the judges came down and said this is First Amendment stuff that we cannot touch with a 10-foot pole. What's your last thoughts on James Huntsman?
Yeah, I agree with you. Anytime you run afoul of the First Amendment, it's going to be problematic. I think it's our dearly held, United States belief that everyone has the right to free speech and to worship as they choose. Churches have so much protection under the First Amendment that it is really difficult to attack. If you even hint that you're going to challenge the religious argument, then you're going to lose. I think that's a foregone conclusion. I guess my hope was that the fraud was going to stay away from religious claims. And we just have so many contradictory statements on record from these leaders of the church that I was really hoping that would stay away from religious claims. But apparently the judges did not see it that way.
Now, obviously, this could potentially be appealed, although we don't know that for a certainty. It's always possible that they could try to appeal it to the Supreme Court. Again, I'm not a lawyer on this, but it's very grim. So anyway, that's the Mormon News Roundup for this week. Megan, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Before I let you go, I do understand that you have the Mormon joke of the week for us. Can you give that to us?
I tried really hard to come up with a Mormon joke of the week, and I even resorted to my old buddy Grok over there. And the jokes that Grok fed me were so terrible that I don't even want to mention any of them. But I do want to say, over the holidays, I was taking a road trip. I was listening to Nemo the Mormon wrap up the year, and Tanner from Zelf on the Shelf referred to the temple in such a way that I literally had to pull my car over because I was laughing so hard. Tanner referred to the temple as the International House of Handshakes, and I just can't forget it. It was the funniest thing I've ever heard.
That's an old one, but a good one to be sure.
Yeah.
Now, if you go over to the Midlife Revolution on your YouTube channel, Megan, what are we going to find out if we come over to your channel?
Well, the Midlife Revolution is all about taking a pause when you're on that treadmill of life and saying, I don't know if this is the healthiest thing for me. It's about taking everything off the shelf and examining it and saying, what would I do if I was choosing my own life right now? It's about healing. It's about making one small change at a time that's going to improve the quality of your life. And of course, I talk all about Mormonism. I talk about the cases of Lori and Chad Daybell, but mostly I also talk about just self-improvement. I talk a lot about defending against narcissistic personality styles as a survivor of narcissistic abuse myself. So it's mainly about healing and self-improvement injected with a lot of snark and humor.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Let's just play this trailer for those of you out there, because I did enjoy this trailer. This is a well put together.
You and I probably have a lot in common. I'm a mom. I work hard to provide for my family. I have goals and dreams, things I'm good at and things I wish I did better. A few years ago, I was on a treadmill. I think most of us find ourselves there at one time or another. We find ourselves repeating the same old habits and patterns, not really going anywhere. And maybe the treadmill we're on isn't even ours. Maybe it's made up of the expectations of other people. At a critical time in my life, I had a couple of conversations that made me hit the big red stop button on the treadmill. Then I did something revolutionary. I stepped off. I looked around at my life and asked myself, is this what I really want? Some people would call that a midlife crisis, but I didn't radically change my clothing style or buy a sports car. Instead, I started making small changes to my habits and routines. What I noticed was that one small change led to another, and over time, the difference was revolutionary. I think most people define midlife as a certain age, but maybe that's just the time when we take what was given to us in the beginning of our lives and decide to mold it into what we want for us and not for anyone else. You can make small changes that are revolutionary too, like maybe listening to a new podcast. It's just one small thing, but it also might just be revolutionary.
Okay, what projects are you working on and how can people get in touch with you? What do you got coming down the pike in the near future?
Well, right now I'm actually working on my e-course on how to identify and defend against manipulative and controlling people. We're about halfway through the live version of that course, but it's going to be a static on-demand e-course that's available to anyone who is in a relationship with someone who is controlling, giving people lots of hints and tips on how to manage those relationships and defend themselves against abuse. So that's a big thing. My cousin's second trial is getting ready to happen at the beginning of April in Arizona. And of course, I'm going to be there reporting on that situation. And just personally, I have some great stuff coming up. I've got my second grandchild is going to be born in April, and I'm just super excited about life these days. And I'm happy to be collaborating with all these amazing channels in the ex-Mormon space.
You definitely cannot be old enough to have a second grandchild. So I'm just going to assume that you misspoke there. Now, as far as the things that I've got working on, I've got the Mormon movie reviews every Monday night. I'm doing a review of that old 2014 classic, Meet the Mormons. You ever watch this one, Megan?
I've never seen it. I'll have to watch it and hear your review.
In case you can't stomach the whole thing, I do give you the review in about 10 minutes, which is very interesting. This is an officially church-produced movie, and it's the last time in 2014 that the church rolled out the red carpet for a big blockbuster movie, and of course, it fell completely flat. You can watch my review. I'm also releasing this week, the top 10 fails of President Russell Nelson. I think I'm releasing that on Thursday. I've got a lot of content on this channel, so that's no big deal. I'd like to thank my Patreon subscribers here: Royce, RWM, Carol, David, Blaine, Brent, Colette, Michael, Sophronia, especially thanks so much, Sophronia, and to our YouTube members, Starla, Jeffrey, Garrick, Emmerich, Dave, and Lee. And before I let you go, I forgot to mention this, that I should have talked about this before. I asked all the co-hosts to go out with the tagline of the show, which is "No unhallowed hand can stop the Mormon News Roundup from progressing." I forgot to prep you with that. So one more time.
Shoot.
No unhallowed hand can stop the Mormon News Roundup from progressing. I want to thank you so much, Megan, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And if you could give us the tagline, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. I'm going to deliver it in my most Mormon style possible. No unhallowed hand can stop the Mormon News Roundup.